back to the Lily Grace Lifestyle Podcast. Today's guest is Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, and I'm so excited to have you on the show. And you are going to be talking about breaking money silence. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. I'm excited to break money silence with you and have a good conversation.
Yes, I just finished reading your book,
Oh, yay.
and I so appreciate you sending it to me. So, we're going to be talking about the whole subject of breaking money silence, specifically for women entrepreneurs, and how to shatter money taboos, talk more openly about finances, and live a richer life. But a question that I always start out with my guests, what defines your lifestyle? What is that defines who you are?
It's a great question. I would say that it's a couple of different things. The first is it's defined by being outdoors and adventure. I live in Vermont and I'm very committed to being outside, whether it's skiing in the winter or mountain biking in the summer or kayaking. And I also think when it comes to work, I would say that my lifestyle is one where I've dedicated my career to empowering women so they can ask and get paid what they're worth, which is really exciting and fun for me to do.
That's amazing. And as personally, I've been going through that experience throughout my career. It's a very important topic to talk about, as I think most of my listeners, being women, struggle with this issue of money and being taboo and really defining what they're worth. So I think it's going to be a very powerful episode for the listeners today. And I want to ask you, what specific point in time in your childhood really stood out to you as being a pivotal moment where you really reflect back and think like that is how I got to where I am today?
Well, it's interesting that I actually have a story, and I think I was 6 or 7 years old, and it was Easter Sunday. There was something that went on in our family. For some reason, we were out at a restaurant, which isn't what we usually do, but we were out at a restaurant. I was in a booster seat, and this is one of my first memories. I was in a booster seat, and I was really excited because, I had my Easter pink dress on, and we were out in a restaurant, and I was chatting up a storm. And as the story goes, the waiter looked at me at one point during the meal and said, "Kathy, take a lunch break." And the whole table busted up laughing. All the adults found it funny. And I can remember kind of looking around at everybody going, okay, I don't really get the joke because I was just excited to be here and I just had a lot to say. But over the course of time in my life, that story's been told time and time again. And so it is a funny story. You talk so much, the waiter had to tell you to take a lunch break on one hand, but the underlying message is you're too loud, you're too much, you say too much. And so I really think, that was certainly not the intent of my parents, but really what the message was that I fear a lot of women get was somehow I was too much, too big, too loud, and that I shouldn't be using my voice.
Mm.
And so when I look back and I think about that moment, and then I think about, my own struggles to find my voice in my 20s, my teens and my 20s, and then all the work I've done since then to empower myself and others to use their voice, whether that's around money, advocating for themselves, taking care of their bodies, their mind, their spirit. I just think that had to be something that was pretty pivotal because I didn't want anyone to feel that they had to pipe down and they had to take a
Mm.
lunch break.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that story. I feel like we might have all been there at some point in our life and being too much or too loud or too anything really. And in that moment as a child, did you feel stifled or did that empower you even more to keep talking?
I would love to say that it empowered me more, but I look back and I actually, and it was a variety of things, but I can remember shame in that moment, like something was
Mhm.
wrong with me, that it was because I just was being me.
Right.
And there were many instances in my childhood, and I'm very intuitive and I pick up on a lot of feelings. So that's partly my personality, where I just felt like I didn't fit in, like something was wrong with me, as opposed to thinking, oh, this is just me and I'm just different than other people. And that's great. It was more like, oh, you're different than other people. That's not so great.
Mm.
So certainly internalized the feeling that something was wrong with me, and, ultimately had to work to find that self-esteem and realize that it's okay if I don't fit in. In fact, that can be my superpower.
Totally. Thank you for sharing that. I too went through a very similar path as a child and being really loud and excited about life and different in a lot of ways and creative, but then kind of shutting that part of myself down and then becoming insecure because of it. And I feel like people listening, we all go through that journey as society and other kids kind of tell you to fit in and be part of this molded person and the way that society wants to see you, but then you have to kind of build that self-esteem and come back to yourself. So after you grew up and started to learn more about finances and money, what was your path post high school and into college? Where did you start to grow and find that confidence in your education?
It's interesting because I went to college and became a finance major. So when I look back, even when I was a little girl, probably around the same time as the lunch break story, I loved my cash register. I loved money. I was fascinated by it. And so I ultimately went to college for banking and finance. And I got out into the quote unquote real world. And I ended up getting a job as an FDIC bank examiner, which is a wonderful job for somebody who is in their early 20s. You get to travel around, you get to meet lots of different people. But soon I realized it really wasn't what I wanted to do. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So I had kind of this time in my 20s where I was trying to figure that out. And ultimately, what ended up happening is I tend to do all or nothing. So I went from banking and finance to getting a master's in counseling psychology and becoming a therapist specializing in women's empowerment. So that process took some time. But at the same time, I've always been a strong businesswoman. Like I've always liked business. I like strategy. I like even as a therapist, I was one of the few that would go out to doctors' offices and market myself because I just was like, well, this is what you do.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until about 2007 that I decided that I would combine everything I loved about finance, which was the education, and the knowledge of finance and everything that I loved about psychology, which was understanding people, helping people change their behaviors to be healthier. And that's when I created my company, KBK Wealth Connection, and just discovered this whole world of financial psychology, which is, I feel like that's where I finally was like, oh, I fit. This makes sense now. It was a
Mhm.
long journey, but I finally found it.
That's amazing. I love how you married the two. I myself am interested in both finance and business and psychology, so I feel like you're the perfect fit for this podcast. Thanks to Monique and introducing us. But what is psychology when it comes to financial decisions, and how do the two play together in the same court?
Financial psychology is basically the study of how we think and feel about money and how that impacts our behaviors. So that's our financial decision making. It might be how we save, invest, how we spend, how we gift our money. And so it's really about understanding the emotional side of money. And what
Mm,
is really interesting to me is that people are so different around money, but because we don't talk about it on a regular basis, we often feel like somehow we're doing it wrong, when in fact we may just be doing it in a way that fits with who we are, because each of us is born with a certain money personality, and that personality isn't, again, right or wrong. It's just a way of being around money. And the goal is to learn how to be healthy within that money personality that you have. If you don't talk about it, then it's hard to know what other people are thinking and feeling around money. And we kind of make up this story that somehow we're not doing it right, or somehow we're blowing it if we make a financial mistake. When in fact, the study of financial psychology and behavioral finance says that smart people do stupid things around money. It's because we have a human brain, not because we're not smart.
right. There's a lot of emotion when it comes to money. And can you describe the different financial personalities and how that plays into our daily lives?
Sure, there's a couple of different assessments that people use. The one that I use breaks it into 8 different money personalities. So let me just give you an example of a couple of them. So My money personality is I'm a accumulator, I'm an alchemist, and I'm a nurturer. So an accumulator, just at a high level, tends to be somebody that's like an inner banker. They're very responsible around money. They typically like to save more than they like to spend. And for people who are accumulators who aren't as healthy, it's actually painful to spend money. So they worry a lot about putting money out there or even investing, anything that where money's going out the door. An alchemist tends to be, and you might have a little bit of this in you, a creative person, somebody who likes to monetize creative ideas. So, for instance, for me, it's writing books,
Mm.
developing workshops. I also work with a woman who is a writer, and so she's an alchemist through and through, right? Selling her writing skills to other people. And so alchemists, they can be really great because they are so creative. But the downside in terms of money is that often they can have shiny little light syndrome, which is there's so many ideas that they can't
Yeah.
pick one to focus on. And the last money personality that I'll talk about is nurturer, where it's just like it says, like a nurturer is really about relationships. So often people who have a nurturing money personality can struggle with under earning, which is they struggle to ask for a fair fee or to negotiate a good salary because money is secondary to the relationship. And
Mm.
so for nurturers, there's a lot of good in there, but there's also learning how to advocate for yourself and set financial boundaries. So
That's
every money personality kind of has their benefits and then their drawbacks.
totally. And I like how you mentioned all three of those and being a little bit of all of them. And I
Uh-huh.
think as we learn and grow, we can shift from one to the other, it seems. And I feel like I've morphed a little bit more into the alchemist, and I was more of a saver versus a spender. Then I got a little more comfortable with spending, which maybe is a good thing or a bad thing. But it's interesting how different phases of your life and different jobs that you're in kind of affect that psychology and that personality. And when it comes to women in business specifically, how can we be brave and stand up for ourselves and what we're worth? Because it's such a scary world out there, especially when you're first starting out in your career or you're in a new position or a new place. It's really hard to know and stand up for what you're worth.
That's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Yes.
So I have a program called How to Unleash Your True Value. It's also written about in the book. It's the bonus chapter. And really what it is about is a three-step process that I take women through. People can either read it in the book and go through it themselves, or they can get coaching around it. But basically, it starts with how do you identify your true value? And I'll tell you what that means in a minute. How do you adopt the right mindset in order to be able to advocate for yourself and learn and grow from mistakes? And lastly, how do you communicate that value in a way where either your boss or the person who's hiring you can hear it, or if you're an entrepreneur, your prospect or client can hear it? And so, value, the way I define it, we think about value, right? It's your skills, it's your knowledge, awards, what all that stuff, right? That we talk about a lot. But I also believe it's your superpower. And so your superpower is that thing that makes you different than everybody else around you. And so often when people buy a service or when they want to hire you, yes, they want the skills and knowledge that you have. They want your expertise, but there's something about working with you, about how you make them feel or what you bring to the table that is different. And so if women can start to really think about that, and then also share that. What I find is that they get better and more confident and are clearer about the value that they provide.
Mm.
And so that's a whole process that people go through, but it's really fun to do. Like I just did a workshop the other day, and one of the exercises was for everybody in the room to identify their superpower. And you may
Mm.
know it, like you may be like, oh, I know it. But a lot of people are like, I don't know what my superpower is. But if you ask friends or people you work with, you just go, what do you think my superpower is? They
Mm.
will tell you. And it's really interesting because you'll start to see trends.
Yes.
So in that workshop, Lily, people were saying things like, I'm a problem solver. I'm curious. I'm empathetic. I'm a great listener. I'm really good at strategy.
Mm.
For me, I get you're approachable. You're easy to talk to. So we really can't discount that superpower. We need to celebrate it and figure out how to communicate that to people in our lives.
Mm. Okay, that's an amazing step. It's really looking within. It's kind of
Yes.
like that psychology piece of really knowing who you are and having that self-awareness. So then you can market it and share it to other people. And I feel like a lot of people, women struggle with, okay, I know my superpower and I can bring this to my audience, but maybe that audience isn't the right audience and they don't want to buy into my service or my product. What would you say to those people and how can they change that narrative?
What's interesting is part of identifying your true value and being able to communicate your worth is finding the people that you really want to work with that are your ideal clients or your ideal firm if you're working for a company. And so I do think it takes some time and energy to figure out what that is. I'll tell you a story which will answer that question. So when I first got into the field of financial psychology, and a lot of the work that I do is with wealth managers and advisors, I remember thinking, I really want to empower women around finance, and I really want to make sure that we learn how to take care of ourselves.
Mm,
Now, I can go directly to women and I can do that. And at the time, I was going to go to a therapy audience
mm,
because I had been a therapist. Uh, I said, or I can go to the financial services professionals who serve these women and do kind of a train the trainer.
mm,
In other words, it's like I drop some knowledge on them. It's like a pebble in a pond and it spreads out.
mm,
And primarily in the financial services industry, which is part of what I'm trying to correct, 85% are male advisors. So I strategically thought, I'm going to bring this message about women to male advisors so they can do a better job serving women, and ultimately that will empower women.
mm.
Now, that was a way of figuring out who's my ideal client. And in terms of ideal, it had to do with who can afford to pay for my services, who's interested in what I have to do in terms of education, and then how do I make this work?
Mm,
Now, I did that for 20 years before I got back to my true passion, which is empowering women directly. Now I do
mm.
both.
Okay.
But so in a long-winded way, what I'm saying is if you're finding that people aren't buying your stuff or aren't, hiring you, you have to figure out first, is this my ideal client? And
Mhm.
number two, if it is, then maybe what I'm talking about or how I'm communicating my value or what I'm offering isn't resonating with them. And so it's hard because sometimes our heart says, "Oh, I want to do this."
Right.
But from a business standpoint, it's like, yeah, you want to be passionate about it, but you want to make sure you offer a service or offer a product that people want to buy. And
Right.
so that's where it's kind of like Venn diagrams where it overlaps, and the Venn diagram is where you need to focus.
That's so
Does that make
important.
sense?
It really does. And what I got out of that is that sometimes your target audience is not the most obvious. You're a woman wanting to empower women, so you're like,
Yep.
okay, I'm going to go to the women. But for the male financial advisors, that was a very strategic move that you did because it's like those are the people that could afford you at the time, and that's how you're going to empower women, train the trainer. I think that's are empowering because sometimes the most unobvious people or the unobvious things at the beginning are the most valuable. You just have to find them.
Well,
Thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast episode. Without you, I would not be where I am today. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, and follow the podcast. And if you haven't already checked out my vlog formatted videos, please do. There I show exclusive behind the scenes on my lifestyle, my routines, my travels, friends, business, relationships, etc. And it's the more laid back, low-key version of the life. Stay tuned for more, and thank you so much again. And let's get back into this amazing episode.
well, and one of the ways in which I found that, and so the beauty is I get to serve men and I get to serve women.
Yes.
So I get to, I get it all now. But in the beginning, I actually was talking to a friend of mine who happened to be a guy, and I was trying to figure out who should I deliver this service to? And he said to me, he goes, don't take offense to this. He goes, and I don't mean this in a negative way. He goes, but can hang with guys, you can communicate with men, and you're not the most like frilly of women. And I said, well, I'm not going to take offense to that. I take that as a compliment. I mean, ski with the guys and mountain bike with the
That's
guys. I
great.
get it.
Yeah.
And he goes, I think you could do a really good job connecting with men on about this topic. And so it
Mhm.
really
Okay.
it's important to listen to the people around you. Not everybody's right, but at
Mhm.
least take it in and evaluate it. Because I can remember at first being like, oh, no, I really wanted to work with women. And then I was like, he really is onto something.
Yeah.
And so, the goal has always been to empower women, whether it's through the male advisors, whether it's empowering women who are advisors or coaches and consultants or um, podcasters like you, and really being able to do it in a strategic way.
That's amazing. And for people listening, when it comes to negotiating their value, if they're going through a job transition or trying to remarket and reformat their services and their pricing, how can people negotiate and really get the most value out of their future endeavor?
I think the first piece, like I talked about with the identifying your value, I think it's really coming up and doing some research on, the concrete stuff, the rational side of it. What will the market bear? What pricing model do you want to use? Do you want to do a cost plus, which basically means I'm going to figure out my expenses and a profit margin? Do I want to price myself according to what the competitors are doing, or do I want to offer value, which
Mhm.
I'm a proponent of, where I package it in terms of the value that I provide? So that's
Mhm.
how does my customer perceive that value? So you have to do that concrete research. And then you also need to think creatively about how do I create value? How do I talk about stories where I have
Mhm.
had an impact, whether that's financial or emotional, ideally both with the clients or the companies that I've worked with? And that's all part of the negotiation process.
Mhm.
I teach a class at Champlain University. It's Champlain, it's actually not a university, it's Champaign College online. They have a physical campus as well, and it's all about business strategic negotiation. So there's lots of different tactics in there, but you have to start with figuring out your pricing model and where you want to start. I think the other thing that I often tell the women that I'm coaching is you can only negotiate down. You typically don't
Mhm.
negotiate up. So start high
That's
because you
very
never
true.
know.
That is so true. And it can be really uncomfortable
Mhm.
for people, for women to state how much they think they're worth. I've been in situations where I'm like, oh, this feels a little out of my league, but you have to kind of aim high and then hopefully meet on your middle ground. And that feeling of being uncomfortable, where do you think that comes from?
I think the discomfort for people is it comes from different places, but I know as women in general, and you tell me if this is changing at all with the younger generations, but
Mhm.
we get really mixed messages about being profit motivated, about
Mhm.
putting ourselves first, about, dare I say bragging, like, tooting our own horn.
Yes.
And those mixed messages get in our head. I think on top of that, money and our salaries and what we make is such a personal, emotional thing. Like a lot of times it feels so much more personal than if we were, I was selling you a pencil. Like
Yeah.
you're not that emotional for a product. And so it gets really tied up in that. And lastly, I think a good negotiator isn't that you don't have the emotions, it's that
Mhm.
you learn how to use those emotions, how to calm them down for when you're actually having the negotiation conversation, and to realize if you're anxious or you're nervous, it's just because you care.
Yeah.
And it's you care and you're also trying to do something new. So give
Mhm.
yourself a break. Even the best negotiators have feelings about it. You wouldn't be a human being if you didn't. It's what you do with those feelings. And if you let that fear get in the way, or if you say, okay, despite the fear, I'm still going to ask, what's the worst thing that can happen? They say no, and I will survive.
That is so important. It really comes down to emotional intelligence and being able to use your feelings in a positive, beneficial way, which I love learning about. And in the book, it's so interesting. There's so many great nuggets that I was reading and exercises and questions that you ask to really dig deeper into that money mindset and the personality and all the things that we're talking about. Um, in what ways can these exercises in these chapters really help people go deeper? Because I mean, we're trying to do that right now through this podcast, but as people are going throughout the book themselves, why is this something that they should be really focusing on?
I think it's important that when you learn something, so you get this knowledge, that you actually experience it and I believe in experiential learning. So you have to actually try it on. And
Mhm.
so each chapter is broken down into a category. So the beginning of the book is really about why money silence is a problem, how it negatively impacts us. And then the second part of the book is a roadmap for breaking money silence. How do you have conversations with your aging parents, your kids, if you have them, people, your boss, whoever it might be? And so I think the reason I like the concrete exercises is because it helps you go, okay, I've read this, but how does this apply to my life?
Mhm.
How can I integrate this? Do I want to integrate this? So at the end of each chapter, there's usually most of the exercises are to increase your self-awareness and help you understand what are my strengths around talking about money as it relates to this topic, and what are my challenges, and what are the actions I can take to do better. I also encourage people reading the book that if you were to read the book in a group, you do the exercises together and then you discuss them, because that in itself, you're breaking money silence. Like you're having a
Yeah.
money conversation just in the essence of having the book study group.
Right.
And lastly, I also, at the end of each chapter, have an exercise for financial advisors, because I want financial advisors, who, by the way, are people too and not perfect about talking
Mhm.
about money. I want them to be able to not only gain the insights that everybody who's reading the book gain, but also are able to apply it to their practice. So I think they can do a better job helping all of us engage in money conversations that aren't just about the dollars and cents, but are about how we feel about money, our concerns, our anxiety, our joy. It's okay if you get joy
Yeah.
from money.
So
Uh,
true. And in the book, I really loved the portion where you talked about you and your husband and how initially in your marriage you had to have that conversation to break money silence. I feel like the biggest decision in our lives that we make, which I haven't made yet, is who we partner with. And a lot of that is how you deal with money and your background and personality. Differences that you have to overcome. And can you talk about your story with your husband and how that conversation came about and how you broke your own money silence?
sure, sure. Uh, My husband and I were together probably 10, you probably know my story better than me right now, 10 to 12 years before we decided we bought a house and we were going to put on an addition onto this house. And so when we put the addition onto the house, we interviewed a couple of different contractors and we picked one. And I remember at the time we picked the least expensive one. He happened to be our neighbor. He lived across the street. We thought, how bad could it be? Flash forward, it was pretty bad. He broke ground, he abandoned the property, he stole a large amount of money from us. So, for the first time in our marriage, because we share values around money, so the first time in our marriage that we had some conflict, because I dealt with it by becoming a total, remember I told you I was an accumulator and I love saving? I freaked out, very anxious, very controlling, very, oh my goodness, I don't know how we're going to pay the mortgage. When in fact, we had money in savings, so I was a bit extreme in that regard. My husband dealt with it by ignoring it, by looking the other way. He was angry, but I'm just not going to deal with it.
Yeah.
So, and that's typically like I hyper get aware and he goes underground, and then it just gets worse. And
Right.
so one day I walked in. This was old school, right? When I went to the mailbox and I got my mortgage payment or bill, I walked in and my husband was playing a video game. And so he's sitting there playing a video game. And I'm thinking to myself, I am freaked out about being able to pay for the mortgage. And you're like playing a video game. And instead of saying that, which is what I wanted to say, I took a deep breath and I said to myself, okay, if he was a client, what would you say? I said, so can I ask you a question, Brian? That's his name. And he goes, he put down the game console. So I give him some credit for that. And he said, sure. I said, when are you going to start worrying about money? And he thought about it. He really did. And then he looked up at me and he goes, well, I think it's when they repo the TV. I said, what? And so we started laughing. It was like the first time we laughed in the middle of that situation.
Yeah.
And I realized the reason that for him it was repoing the TV is his money history. He grew up with a single mom, not a lot of money, paycheck to paycheck. He was used to going without and
Mm,
knew that, yeah, it's a problem if someone's taking our stuff.
mm,
I grew up in a two parent home, middle class, lots of savings, never really wanted for anything. And so the idea that I didn't have 25% of my annual gross salary in an emergency fund was flipping me out. So when we realized that, we had our first really good money conversation about our histories, about how we each approach this situation, this financial crisis differently. And while we're not perfect about money now, we certainly are much better in that we started to realize, okay, if we get together, some of my strengths and some of his strengths, we'd
mm,
be a great team, as opposed to me looking at, you're not doing it right, Brian. And him thinking, oh, she's so uptight around money, that we
mm,
got together. So that is really how we first broke money silence. I encourage people to do it before they get married.
mm.
And the good news, Lily, is your generation is. I hear that some of the research that I got for the book says that basically majority of Gen Zs are talking about money before they get serious in their relationship, which is very different than my generation, Gen X.
And why do you think that is?
I would like to think it's some of the work that I've done in other people around the fact that money is a really important part of your life. And when you decide to partner, there's no way you can't deal with money. Like it just
Right.
is part of what's going to happen. So I think some of that advocacy. I also think that your generation has seen the mistakes of the older generations. And um, Gen Z and millennials, you all talk about taboo topics a lot more than we
Yeah,
did. I mean, my
so true.
parents were traditionalists, so that's like,
Mm.
they're in their 90s now. And they didn't talk about anything. And then you had boomers who started talking a little bit of, about
Yeah,
drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And then Gen Xers, we're kind of the lost generation. And then it started to be like, oh, we're talking about more things.
right.
And so I think it's a positive generational shift, but I still think people need a roadmap for how to do it.
I love that. And that story really resonated with me just because coming from two different backgrounds as kids, you and your husband, and how that shaped your money mindset as adults and then as a couple, I think was really interesting to me because it really starts from when you're a child and having that thought process still ingrained in you as an adult, it just really affects the way that you deal with things and how you deal with your partner, which is interesting. And what is the mind over money method? I mean, we've been talking about it this
Yeah.
whole time, but to get into specifics so people can really understand the method.
Sure. So, first of all, a money mindset is how you think and feel about money. It usually develops between the ages of 5 and 15 when you're a kid, and often, like you said, Lily, it's in our unconscious thought. And so 95% of our money story and the money mindset that we have is formed in our unconscious thought by observing people. So that's the context. So the mind over money method starts by first identifying what are those thoughts and beliefs you have about saving, spending, gifting, and investing. How do you bring it to your conscious awareness? And there's a couple of exercises to do that in the book. Once you do that, what you get to decide is, does this money script, does this money message serve me, or does it get in the way? Do you have any money scripts that you kind of worked through with the money, mind over money, that we could use it as an example?
Yeah, I feel like, well, it was interesting because my dad growing up always said cash is king.
Yeah.
So having that as a child, like I always helped him count the change in his hand and I just saw him constantly use cash. So I had to then in college get a debit card because no one really took cash. So I really had to understand the difference between the two and not having it be visible and intangible in my
Yeah.
hand was something that I had to get over and start to realize to see how money flowed in a different way digitally. So that's something I really thought about.
Yeah, so the mind over money method might be like if cash is king, in what ways does that serve you? Like how has that helped you in life?
hmm I
Do you
feel like
know?
it's been good because I realized the value of money because
Mhm.
when I was younger, I was able to see it and I had a little box to save,
Yeah.
in my piggy bank. So I understood that there's value by being able to see it because I'm such a visual person. So then growing up and then starting to make money, I was able to understand how you can accumulate it, whether that be on a digital platform or in the
Yeah.
bank or something like that. So it was a really helpful visual for me when I was a child.
Perfect. So how does it not serve you as an adult? Like what are the ways in which it doesn't help, even if they're small?
Hmm. That's more difficult. I feel like it doesn't serve me because I, especially as a young adult, I was a big accumulator, so it was really painful for me to
Yeah.
spend money and let go. I've gotten better because of my environment and the job that I just had as well, but I in college especially, it would be really painful for me to like let go of anything um, without really thinking it through.
Okay,
I've
you
gotten
you
better.
might be an accumulator too.
Yeah, I've
Uh,
gotten better over time, but
yeah. So one of the ways in which cash is king may not serve you is when in it may not be an issue for you, but in general, like if we think about that saying, is sometimes it can get in the way because it makes sense to invest money. And you
Mm,
have to and it's not in cash because in order to
sure,
create
yeah.
wealth, often we're invested in the stock market or real estate or something. And so that's the way in which it can get in the way. And so just to finish up the concept of mind over money, it really is about shifting your thought. So instead of saying cash is king, maybe a new way of saying it is, cash is a really important tool, and so is investing.
Mm,
So it's coming up with a message that's going to serve you better as an adult. Because when we
mm,
were kids, we come up with all these sayings that are pretty
yeah.
black and white. And we all know as adults, money is anything but black and white.
Oh, so true. Yeah, I really like that because you're right. Actually, as a um, young adult, I really just wanted to stockpile a bunch
Yeah.
of cash or savings. But you're right. Now, I the past couple of years, I did start to realize that I needed to invest more money in my retirement and my brokerage accounts and things like that, so
Yeah.
that I was
Yeah.
able to diversify. So yeah, that's really great. And I can see why you're good at this because you're able to talk people through why these things are so important, but as you said, so subtle and not recognizable from a lot of people's stories. So that's interesting. And in this new edition with the bonus chapter, How to Unleash Your True Value, what can people expect from that and what can they learn?
Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to take the Breaking Money Silence message because this book was first published in 2017. So in
Mhm.
2025, it's a second edition. So it's all updated. But the original book was really about talking about money in your family, talking about money in your personal life. And the bonus chapter is really moving the Breaking Money Silence message to the workplace, specifically for women around asking and getting paid what they're worth. So, in that chapter, I describe in depth the 3 steps you need to take in order to unleash your true value. We mentioned them before: identify your true value, adopt a success mindset, and communicate that value. And I walk people through how you go about doing that and how you can start to communicate your value and negotiate more effectively. And so I'm very excited about that chapter because it's really nice to be able to bring that work out into the world. The other work had been in the world for like 8 years, but
Yeah.
that bonus chapter is like the first time I was like, see, you can apply it to women in work. So there'll be more where that comes from. And that's really the focus of the coaching that I do with women professionals now.
That's amazing. And do you have a specific success story that you could share with us when it comes to unleashing your true value and women in the workplace?
Sure. I work primarily with women entrepreneurs, but I also do work with women who work in corporations. So I'll tell you a quick one about a woman who worked in a corporation. So she came to do some coaching with me because she was very, very frustrated that she'd been with this company for 18 years, that she was a doer. She worked really hard, took on stretch assignments, but she wasn't getting anything but cost of living increases, never got a raise, really wanted a title bump. She, I believe, wanted to get into that director level and kept getting denied and kept getting denied. So we worked together for 6 months. We took her through the Unleash Your True Value process, and she really was able to get to a place where she could more effectively communicate and advocate for herself at work with leadership because she realized she wasn't doing it the best way possible. And she was able to then go in a very different way and ask for a raise and ask for a new title. She ended up, unfortunately, getting denied again. At that point, she decided, okay, maybe this isn't the firm I need to stay with for another 18 years. Maybe I need to look for another company. And so I supported her through that process. The last time I talked to her, she had landed a great job at a regional bank. She was going to be a director, and she was beside herself because she negotiated a salary that was almost twice as much as what she was making at the previous firm.
Wow.
And so she was so excited. We touch base every once in a while. And so it was so wonderful to help her through that process, not only to communicate her value, but
Mm,
actually to go through the negotiation process and hang in there. Like a lot of us, she just
yeah.
wanted to like, let's be done. And I was like, no, counter offer, counter offer. And when she countered offered, she was just thrilled to have doubled her
Wow.
income. Yeah,
That's
super fun.
fulfilling and shows that it just sometimes takes time as well. And sometimes you have to pivot your whole mindset of where you're at or, the location that you're at in
Well,
order
you
to.
have to find someone who's going to value you, right?
Yeah.
So part of it is if you're going to communicate your value and you're going to get paid for your value, if you're an entrepreneur, you've got to find the clients that are going to value. If you are working in a corporation, you've got to find the right culture.
That's true.
And, it also helps to have support.
Mm,
She had certainly my coaching support, but she had support of her partner, support of some of her friends and her network. So it's really, it, it's really an important piece of work that I think we could all do. And, even me, I wrote a book on it, but
yeah.
occasionally I need some girlfriends or my husband to pump me up before I do a negotiation around a project. So
Right. Yes.
support is
And
important.
specifically for you being an entrepreneur, I would say half of my audience, if not more, are creative entrepreneurs in some way, shape, or form. How has your journey shifted throughout time when it comes to defining your value and where are you at now?
Well, when I started out, and I'll talk about being starting this company, KBK Wealth Connection, in like 2007. When
Mhm.
I started out, I actually unconsciously volunteered 20 hours a week and worked 20 hours a week, even though I thought I was
Mm.
starting a full-time training company. And so what I realized is if you give all your time away, it's really hard to run a profitable business.
Mhm.
So I had to do my own work around my relationship with money and really kind of figure out why was it, and that's where this breaking money silence stuff started. Why was it that I wasn't asking for what I was worth? I was avoiding these money conversations. And so I have now been doing it almost 20 years. I would say that I am very confident in my value. I can clearly articulate it 99% of the times because sometimes we have an off day. And when I don't land a deal for what I wanted it, the amount to be, I don't beat myself up anymore, or I
Mhm.
don't avoid it. I spend some time thinking what went right, what went wrong, and what can I learn from it. And
Mhm.
I think that is what's a success mindset, is really figuring out how you can learn from each of these situations. Because not every negotiation is going to be a yes.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're wonderful and they go smoothly. Sometimes they take a while. But it's really, really important to kind of stick to whatever your pricing philosophy is and also stick to knowing that you have value to provide. So
Mhm.
I would say I went from an under earner, classic under earner. There's a quiz in the book if you want to know what that is and take that quiz, to somebody who's financially successful. And the beauty is we get to define successful any way we want. Um, Earlier in my career, it was making a certain amount of money.
Mhm.
At this point in my career, it's making a certain amount of money and having a lot of work-life balance.
That's so important. And at the beginning of your career, when you started your business and you were volunteering 20 hours of your week, do you think you would have gotten to where you are now if you did not do that? Because I feel like I'm at this point in my freelance business and just in business in general where I'm really at a place where I can start saying no and having these boundaries and setting my rates and leaving them there. But I don't know if I would have gotten here if I wasn't the yes, yes, yes person at the beginning. Maybe I could have switched a little sooner, but I that opens so many doors and opportunities to then lead me to the place where I can start saying no.
Two things. One is I'm not a person who regrets things, so I don't really regret that I did that. I do think it was part of my journey. So that was part of your journey. I think the second thing is it's really what I encourage people to do is think strategically. Like when you do, like I just said yes to a free engagement. So, but I very strategically thought about it.
Mhm.
I thought about what I could negotiate a value for me that was not money or
Mm.
my speaking fee, what I was going to get from it. And it was a very strategic decision. As
Yeah.
opposed to at the beginning of my business, it would just be like, oh, someone wants me to do something. Sure.
Yes, me too.
And
Even with
yes,
this
you develop
podcast.
networks, but at some point you have
Yeah.
to let people know, like, hey, you need to pay me to do this.
Yes. No, it's
Yeah.
so true. It's so important. And we all go through that journey, especially when you make your own rules, your own rates, and just being an entrepreneur in general, you're kind of setting your own course and you have to learn through doing, I think, which is important.
And no one does it perfectly,
No.
and you can always reevaluate. I
Totally.
might do this engagement. I think I made the right decision. I just made it this morning. In 6 months, if I look back and I go,
Mm.
shouldn't have given that one away, then I will adjust.
Totally. And I'm really excited about this conversation. It's just a very timely thing for me in my life right now. And I know so many people in my network going through big transitions and starting to negotiate for themselves or going out on their own. So it's a very tangible conversation. And this book has so many takeaways from it. And what is next for you? What are you excited about in this year? It's already March, but what are you looking forward to, and what are you excited to launch?
I am super excited to get back out on the road a little bit. I haven't been speaking much, so it's really fun. I have a couple keynotes set up and some interest in professional speaking engagements, so I'm excited for that. I also am really excited about the coaching that I'm doing with women. I have the program is called Unleash Your True Value, and I actually, depending on when this comes out, I have a free webinar coming up on April 17th, which is all about what your prices are communicating to your prospects. So if anybody
Mm.
is interested in signing up for that, I could certainly make sure you have the registration link. And we're just talking about the message we send with our pricing and how we can communicate our value and make sure we're providing a lot of value to our clients. Because I really do believe it isn't always getting the highest fee, but it's providing the greatest value and being compensated for that value that I think is important. So those are the things that I'm excited about.
Amazing. And how can people work with you, connect with you, find you online? Because I feel like they're going to want to learn more and buy the book too.
Thank you. The easiest thing to do is go to my website, which is kbkwealthconnection.com. I'm on LinkedIn. My name, I apologize, happens to be long. Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, no hyphen. You can find me there. And I will certainly share a link for the book if you would like me to do that. But you can find it at any store, anywhere from Amazon to an indie book dealership to you can actually go down to your local bookstore and request that they order it for you. So definitely check out Breaking Money Silence.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kathleen, for coming on the show today. I so appreciate your time, and I took so much out of this, and I know my listeners will as well. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. It was super fun.